Hi, family. A very warm welcome to you all. It's been a minute since we were all together. I'm so excited for us just to be back on our, weekend theology sessions. I kind of actually missed them, I must be honest. I really hope that you managed to use the break very productively. And yeah, I'm super excited just for us to get back. I've had some feedback from many of you, and many of you have told me that, using the break for catching up was really, really useful, or even just for like a little bit of a rest. So I am thinking that, at the end of maybe each month or so, we will just reserve about 3 days of rest and catching up, for the instances when we just need to catch up on whatever it is that we have actually missed out on. So we're going to be continuing literally from where we left off in our last theology teaching. And before we go on, I just want to highlight something, because I was speaking to one of our fellow scholars and she was a bit confused about the order of how the videos, take place. Do we watch the video first and then we read the Bible, verses about that video, or the other way around? So the proper way to do it is to first watch these videos, okay? So whatever it is that I'm saying in these videos, I'm basically telling you what you're going to expect in the week to come. I'm telling you what you're going to start expecting as of Monday. So, as of Monday, when you now finally start reading the Bible, you're going to be reading whatever it is that I told you in this video, because the idea is that I want to make it a bit more digestible for you, a bit easier for you to understand the concepts, because it's not the first time you're coming across them. So that's the proper way to do it. But if you find that maybe you just don't really have time to always watch before, then you can watch after. But as long as you just don't compromise on the video teachings, because as you are aware, the teachings are very compulsory. And you'll also realize that there are many revelations from the teachings that are not easily found when you are reading on your own accord. So that's the reason as to why I always say the teachings are very compulsory. Please don't skip out on them. The proper way is to watch the teaching first and then read about what's going to happen. But if for one reason or another you can't do that, that's also fine, as long as you just do get to reading the actual teachings, okay? Without us wasting any more time, let us go ahead and start, or rather continue, with the book of Joshua from where we left off. I just wanted to say that we're going to be moving over through to the book of Judges. So please just do read the outline in your Bible study guide, which just summarizes the book of Judges. You'll also see uploaded a short video on the book of Joshua and the book of Judges, just sort of summarizing what those books are about, who wrote the books, what was the purpose of the books, because like we said the last time, we are sort of out of Mosaic authorship. So the parts where Moses wrote the books, we're sort of moving away from that part, and now we're getting introduced to different types of authors, okay? So it's quite important for you to understand who wrote the books, because even the writing style is different. It's different to all the other books because it wasn't the same person who wrote them. But it does follow a chronological order. So moving from the Torah to Joshua to Judges is very chronological, okay? Yeah, so I think that should help you in piecing things together, So let's carry on. We're going to be carrying on from Joshua 15 in this particular teaching for today. And basically, we're going to just be uncovering, or unpacking rather, the core themes that took place, the main events that took place. The Bible study guide summary sort of hones in on these a bit more. So please just do take some time to read through that, including the reflective questions. And we're also going to go through some of the missed revelations, okay? We're at the point now where God has already elected a new leader, and the new leader that God has elected is Joshua, okay? And we see that basically the task of Joshua was to really preserve the Israelites and lead them into the promised land, because at this point Moses has passed away. We are told that God himself buried Moses. So yeah, Moses at this point is no longer in the picture. So Joshua is now tasked with leading these people, the new generation, into the promised land. And it's quite interesting, because something about Joshua that is continuously said throughout the text is God always sort of encouraging him to say, do not fear, be strong and courageous. God is always saying that to Joshua across multiple texts in the book of Joshua, because you see, Joshua had really big shoes to fill. He was really walking in the footsteps of Moses, who was quite an extraordinary man. And I mean, till this day, we haven't really had any leaders like Moses, and we haven't even had people who have had exclusive encounters with God, like seeing the back of God, God telling him all of the things to write, the 10 Commandments, the book of Genesis to Deuteronomy. So no one, and even him being buried by God, no one really has the exclusive experiences in all of humanity, like Moses had. Some do come close, for example, like Enoch. He also had very incredible experiences. But yeah, so I think Joshua had a lot of pressure, and I think he also was a bit fearful because the lands that God had actually told him that they were going to conquer, there were giants that lived there. There were actual giants. We see that God always tells him, look, I've got your back, don't worry. And God even allows a sign to be given to the Israelites just to prove and show that indeed he is with Joshua. And that's when Joshua parts the Jordan, which is quite amazing. So we see that, as we move on from Joshua 15, basically it's the continuation of the allotment of land. Basically, God fulfilling his promise that he made to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And we see that God fulfills his promise by giving Israel their inheritance, but Israel fails to remove the enemies completely. So there are different tribes, right, that get different pieces of land. And the idea here is that God said to them, look, these tribes, they don't have pure spiritual practices, okay? They actually have very dangerous, contrary spiritual practices. And for this reason, God instructed the Israelites to, first of all, not marry any of their people. Second of all, to remove all of their worshiping places, their altars on the hills, on the mountains. God said all of that must just be removed. And then God also said that they must actually be destroyed and that none of them must be left. And God even said to them, if you don't destroy these people in the land that you are going into, they will become a snare unto you. They will become a yoke unto you. They will be like a thorn on your side, And we see that as Israel is entering into these different lands, the tribes that are taking up this different land, some of them are adhering to the request of God for them to cast out all of the people who lived there before and destroy all of their worship and their altar places. But some of them, maybe out of fear or just out of laziness, just choose to sort of live side by side with these people, which is a very big mistake. You see that in this frame, so different land is allotted to different tribes of Israel. So land is allotted to the tribes of Judah, of Ephraim. Remember, Ephraim and Manasseh are the descendants of Joseph. These are the children of Joseph. But different land is allotted to different tribes of Israel, right? So to Judah, to Ephraim, to Manasseh, Benjamin, Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan. And we see that Caleb was a man who was sort of leading the Israelites side by side with Joshua. He managed to drive out the giants in these lands where the Israelites were taking up space. And because of the victory that he got with some of the men who went to go and fight in battle against these giants, one of them being Othniel, he decided to actually give his daughter in marriage to Othniel. Othniel is a very important character in the Bible because he later on in the text we're going to learn becomes the first judge. So when we get to the book of Judges, we're going to read about all the judges of the land. And the word judge is a bit misleading because we tend to think that these were like courtroom judges or like judges who knew like the law of Israel. While that is true, there were people who did know quite a lot about the law of Moses and the laws that God, commanded the Israelites to be governed by. Judges were actually people who often led the Israelites into battle. They were actually deliverers. There are people who actually delivered Israel out of different forms of oppression. And we're going to see that when we get to the book of Judges, that there are leaders. Whenever it is that the Israelites were oppressed, God would raise up a judge, and the judge would help them by taking them to battle. And through this judge, God would grant them the victory to be able to break free from the oppression. So it's almost like mini Egypt. You can think about it that way. There was the big Egypt where they were under bondage, but there's a phase that's going to come where the Israelites are under these short oppressive seasons, maybe like 50 years, 20 years, 80 years, short periods of oppression. And then God just sort of raises up a leader for them. And once that leader destroys the opposition, the Israelites are free again, they get some peace, and then they start rebelling against God again, and then they start getting oppressed again, and then God must raise up another judge again. It's like a whole cycle of, them basically sinning against God, them being oppressed, them crying out to God, God raising up a judge, the judge defeating their opponents, and then there's peace, and then they go back into sin, and it's just the same cycle over and over. So Othniel was actually the first judge that we're going to see, and that's who Caleb gave his daughter to marry. And then we also see that the tribe of Joseph, right? If you remember correctly, Joseph was the man who was sold by his brothers, right, into Egypt, but then he ended up being the prime minister of Egypt, and then all his brothers went to Egypt because of him. And when Jacob, his father went to Egypt, he says to Joseph, I'm going to take your firstborn son and, the son after him, that is Ephraim and Manasseh, and I'm going to consider them to be my own children. That's what Jacob said to Joseph. All the children after that, Joseph, that's fine, those can be yours, but these first two, I'm considering them to be mine. So that's why Ephraim and Manasseh are always counted as part of the tribes of Israel. They make up the tribe of Joseph, okay, but they're always referred to separately because Jacob adopted them separately, right? So that's why they are not the original children of Jacob. So Jacob has 12 sons, and then there's these two, Ephraim and Manasseh, who are actually the sons of Joseph, right? And they are sort of adopted into being the tribes of Israel. So collectively, as a collective, Ephraim and Manasseh are referred to Joseph's tribes. Joseph's tribes complain that their portion is too small. So they say, look, we've got too many people, we've got too much cattle, we've got too many, things like items. We need a bigger land. And Joshua says, the issue with you, tribe of Joseph, is not the size of the land. The problem here is that you did not drive out the Canaanites as you were supposed to. There are still Canaanites living in the land that you are currently living in. The land that God, apportioned and allotted to you. God said you must drive out all of the Canaanites. You must drive out all the people who live there. If you don't drive them out, well, first of all, there's not going to be enough space, like we are sharing space with you and them and their flock and everything else of theirs. Second of all, you didn't even destroy their altars, so the spiritual decay in that place is just running on rampant. Third of all, they're going to eventually become a snare to you. They're going to eventually oppress you because while you are not standing up and fighting against them. So yeah, that's what happens. Joseph's tribes complain about the portion being too small, but it was actually just them being lazy and just maybe even being scared of fighting the Canaanites. So we see that a tabernacle is set up at Shiloh. So remember, when they were in the wilderness, there were all of these instructions that God gave about the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle. But because now they were moving, right, obviously they have to now sort of set up a tabernacle at their new place, a central place of worship, a central place of offering, a central place where the Spirit of God dwells. And yeah, we also see that there's still some land. There was a lot of land, okay? There's still some land that was not assigned. So some of the missed revelations in this frame is the fact that the tribe of Judah, right, the land where they had actually been allotted was where the Jebusites used to live. And because they also did not drive them out, just like how the tribe of Joseph did not drive out the Canaanites, the tribe of Judah also did not drive out the Jebusites. In other words, they're now living in the midst of these people. And the place, where they are sort of, living with these people, but the Israelites sort of have their own portion among the land. This is called Jerusalem. Jerusalem remains unconquered. It remains a place where the Jebusites are just sort of there, all the way until David is in the picture. You might not know who David is, we're going to cover it, but David only comes into the picture 400 years later. 400 years later. So these people that Judah did not cast out of the land are still there until David cast them out 400 years later. So we see that, because of their incomplete obedience, they couldn't have full dominion in the land, which is so sad. Like God is saying, I'm giving you everything. I'm giving you the power to defeat them. We also see that when Joseph complained about the land, Joshua told them, you have great power. Clear the forest and drive out your enemies. So he's saying to the tribe of Joseph, look, you are very strong and there's all of the space. There's a whole forest. Go and clear them out. Go and clear out the forest, make space, cast the people out. God has given you power to defeat them. And you see, their limitation was not lack of inheritance. It wasn't the fact that God did not give them a big portion, like how they were complaining, oh no, our land is so small, we've got so much flock. It wasn't that. It was just the fact that, they had lack of faith and they were a bit lazy. They really lacked a lot of effort, and God already provided enough for them. And it just reminds me of the scripture that says, faith without works is dead. You can have all the faith you want, you can have the promise of God, but if you are not actively working towards attaining that promise, then sometimes it will just remain unconquered. And we see that with both Judah and Joseph. Something else very interesting about this frame is the fact that Caleb, he's still fighting the giants. Even though he is at this point a very old man, he is 85 years old, but he's still in battle against the giants in order for him to actually fulfill the promise of God actually granting the Israelites this land. So he's still leading battle, he's still in battle. And we see that age does not cancel divine purpose. Does not matter how old you are or how much time you think you've lost. Age does not cancel divine purpose. All right, let's move over through to our next frame. In this next frame, we see that there are 6 cities of refuge that are built. Remember, God was quite insistent on, the Israelites ensuring that there is a set apart space for unintentional sin. So cities where people can flee to whenever it is that there is unintentional sin that took place. And we also see that God says to Israel, look, among all of the Israelites, all other tribes, they will all get a piece of land, but the Levites, because this particular group of people is dedicated to God, and because they are called in particular for priesthood and in particular for serving in the tabernacle, God says that He is their inheritance. They won't get an actual piece of land. God is their inheritance. God is their reward. And He says to them, instead of them having their own section somewhere else separately, they will actually just dwell among all the other tribes. Right? So wherever it is that some tribes dwell, if some of the Levites want to also dwell there, they can. So basically the Levites are given almost like a free card to just stay wherever it is without them actually being forced to stay as one tribe. So they are allowed to disperse into the rest of the land, wherever it is that the other Israelites are living. And the reason why God does that, a key revelation that is missed, the Levites were spread among the tribes because God was very intentional about placing spiritual influence everywhere. He didn't want the spiritual influence to be in one corner and then the rest of the Israelites are just not in the presence of God. He wanted the spiritual influence of the Levites to spread everywhere and not for it to be centralized. This was God's way and His strategy of preventing spiritual decay. So He knew that so long as the Levites were among the tribe of Israel, it wouldn't be easy for them, to fall into continuous sin because, the priests are there, the tabernacle, people who serve in the tabernacle are there. So them being spread out in Israel was really a strategy to preserve holiness across the whole tribe of Israel. We also see in this frame, a very popular scripture which says, not one word failed of any good thing which the Lord had spoken. In other words, every single thing that God promised came to pass. Not one word that God had spoken failed of any good thing which God had spoken. So every single thing that God said He was going to do, He did. God completely fulfilled His promise. The failure of any Israelites who were not able to enter into land was not because of God's fault, but it was because of their own compromise. It was because they were afraid to go in and fight the people who lived in that land. And for that reason, some of them were cramped up in small patches of land, and it's like, but why? God has given you so much, but they were just so afraid of going into battle. The third frame, we see, this is just before basically Joshua passes away. So we see that, Joshua at this point is warning the Israelites to say, look, this compromise, you are all compromising. God said, cast out all of these people. Why are they there? Why are you still staying with them? Why are you cramped up in small lands? There is literally chunks and chunks of land. And He said to them, I'm warning you, if you don't, if you keep on compromising, these people, they're going to destroy you. If you keep being comfortable with living among these people, they will destroy you. And we also see that, the eastern tribe, right? Remember there were those tribes that decided just to stay on the east of the Jordan. So before the rest went into the deeper parts of the promised land, there were some who said, we're fine right here, we can just camp right here. So we see that, they built an altar just by the border, right? And just by close to the Jordan River. And we see that, when they built this altar, the rest of the Israelites were very concerned, and it actually almost led into a civil war. It was almost a war between these two groups of Israel, the ones who are on the east and the ones who are on the other side of the Jordan. Why? Because the ones on the other side of the Jordan, let's just call them the 80%, because they were the most, right? The 80% were complaining to say, why is the 20% of the Israelites on the other side making another altar? Are they trying to, serve other gods? Are they trying to create a sort of golden image, like a sort of molded image after God? Is this idolatry? So they were really questioning why they did that. And they were just like, you are now turning away from God. You are creating your own things. You're doing your own systems. We already have an altar. Like, why are you creating your own? Are you really getting ready just to start serving other gods? What's the story here? And then the 20% say, oh, no. It's just that we want there to be a reminder for our future children in the future time to come that there is a connection between you and us. Because as we speak, we are separated by the Jordan River. 1,000 or 10,000 years from now, our children and our descendants might not even know that we are actually related. So we just wanted to have an altar dedicated to God, just to show them, to say, you see this altar, it represents the altar that is in Israel. It is the same altar that is in Israel. It is proof of the fact that we are connected to the 80%. And then the misunderstanding was understood, and then everybody was happy again. And then we see that Joshua gives a farewell. It's literally like chai for Joshua. He's about to pass away, and he warns them again about mixing with the other nations. And Joshua dies at the age of 110. It's quite interesting because we see that a constant sort of theme is that, for example, when Moses passed away, his parting words to the Israelites was, don't rebel against God. Don't be disobedient. Make sure that you follow all of the make sure that you follow all of the laws of God. And even now with Joshua, even if he's like in his last days, he's still saying the same thing. Don't be disobedient. Follow the laws of God. And it just proves and shows, what can I say, the itch. The Israelites had an itch for sin. Like they were itching for sin. Like any opportunity where they could just like sort of break away and go and serve Baal, child, they were taking it. Like, yeah, they honestly remind me of us, I'm not gonna lie. They remind me even of this generation. There's such an itch for sin, such an appetite for sin, and that's exactly how, the Israelites were. We see that Joshua says to them, if you associate with these nations, there will be snares and traps unto you. And Joshua prophesies exactly what starts to happen in Judges. Because remember, I said that in Judges, a cycle begins to start where the Israelites fall into sin, they start worshiping other gods, and then the people of that land starts to oppress them. And then after they are oppressed, they cry out to God, and then God raises up a deliverer for them, a judge. The judge helps them defeat their enemies, and then there's peace, and then they go back into sin again. So it's almost like these mini outbursts of Egypt. It's like small micro cycles of what happened in Egypt. That starts happening again. Like how the Israelites were crying against God, saying, Lord, we are oppressed in Egypt. Please help us. We've been here for 400 years. And then God brought up Moses, right? But we see that the same cycle sort of takes place even in these other lands. They keep falling into sin, and God still has to keep up raising up different deliverers to bring them out. And once there's peace, they forget all about God again. And this happens over hundreds of years. So we see also in this frame that something very interesting happens, which is the fact that, Joshua said something very similar to what Moses said, because Moses kept saying, I present before you life and death, choose life. I'm presenting before you every single thing that you need in order for you to live. Choose to live. And Joshua says something similar. He says, choose for yourselves this day who you will serve. Because it's almost like the Israelites are like trying to serve other gods in the dark corners, but like everybody can see it. Like Joshua knows it's happening, everybody knows it's happening. And Joshua says, choose for yourself today who you will serve. Okay. And then he says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But as for you, I don't know where you stand. Are you hot or are you cold? He says, choose on this day whom you will serve. And he says, basically what he's saying to them is that whatever that happens from this point is not because of a fate. It's not like, oh no, the Israelites were captured and now they are, bound. It was really because of the choices that they made. And it reminds me quite a lot about us. Sometimes we blame so much on witchcraft and spiritual warfare and the enemy. But in many, 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 many times, the thing that actually, is our biggest opponent is the choices that we make. Our inability to make quality decisions and choices that help our lives move forward. So we see also in this frame that, Israel served God while the elders who knew Joshua were still alive. So while the elders who knew Joshua were alive, Israel was still serving God. Yes, there were like pockets of disobedience, but for the bulk of it, while there were still people who knew Joshua, Israel was still serving God. But then we see that one generation's experience, which knew Joshua, is not enough to sustain the next generation, because each generation has to have their own encounter with God. So as soon as Joshua dies, and as soon as the elders who knew Joshua also died, begin falling into praising and worshiping other gods. Each generation must encounter God for themselves, or else if there isn't that close proximity encounter in each generation, we see consistently that once the one who was connected to God dies, the next generation is just like lost again. So now we are officially moving over, or transitioning rather, into the book of Judges. And I mentioned that Judges is not actually what we think. They were more just like spiritual leaders and deliverers. They were really designed to deliver the Israelites out of bondage. So we see that the new generation did not know God, right? So now the people who were connected to Joshua, they all passed away. This new generation does not know God. And the beginning of national decline starts. So we see that, as of the book of Judges, a lot of spiritual amnesia starts. A lot of compromise starts. The Israelites just sort of forget about God. They forget about his laws, And the main events here is that the tribes failed to drive out the Canaanites, right? Instead, because they did not drive them out, the Canaanites begin enslaving them, and they also begin living among them. This basically signals a new generation that has arisen that does not know the Lord. Also, as of the beginning of the book of Judges, the serving of Baal sort of becomes widespread. Before it was sort of hidden or like in the corners, but now, as of the book of Judges, there is absolutely no one who still remembers God, and it's not even that long ago. It's not even that long ago, like between Joshua and the book of Judges. Many theologians hold that it's probably less than 20 years. It's not even that long, but they already forgot God, and they were already just serving Baal, which just shows them that that's just truly where their hearts were. They were always itching to serve Baal. They were always itching to serve these other gods. A key misrevelation is the fact that, in the book of Judges in chapter 1, it's constantly saying they did not drive them out. They did not drive them out. This phrase repeats over and over and over. And the revelation here is that Israel tolerated what God told them to destroy, right? And because of the fact that they tolerated what God told them to destroy, that tolerance ultimately becomes their downfall. So we see that God says, you know what, I will no longer drive these people out from you, because I've given you grace, I've given you the power, I've given you the tools, and you're just sort of just like throwing it back in my face. So I'm not going to give you the advantage of winning against them if you go to war with them. And God stops fighting for them. God literally stops fighting for them because they chose to compromise. See that this new generation does not know God at all. And the greatest threat to Israel at this particular point was not their enemies, because, well, they're kind of living in their midst. But it was actually their spiritual decline. They were in so much spiritual decline that even God was just saying, you know what, just do your thing. Okay, it's fine. In the next frame, we'll see that, the cycle of Judges begins. So there's quite a few Judges. And if you have a look at the Bible study guide, you'll see that I've summarized the Judges basically from beginning to end, including whether or not they were good judges. So please just make sure that you read the Bible study guide for this section. It's very, very helpful. You'll see that the Judges start Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, all of them basically just sort of start erupting. And the core theme here is that Israel falls into sin. They are oppressed. They cry out. God raises up a judge or a deliverer. There is peace in the land. and then the cycle sort of repeats all over again. The main events that take place in this particular frame is that, Othniel defeats Mesopotamia. Ehud kills King Eglon. Ehud is a man who was said to be left-handed, and the Bible is so elaborate on how Ehud killed, this king, and he was able to hide his weapon because he was left-handed. And when the king was not, focused or looking, Ehud was able to quickly strike the king. The king in this aspect is the king that was oppressing Israel, right? So these are different judges. There's Othniel, there's Ehud, who kills the king who was oppressing Israel. The next judge is Deborah. Deborah destroys, the opposition of Sisera, and she also works alongside a man called Barak, and also a woman called Jael. Jael. Okay, Jael had a very important role. Some of the key revelations here is that, God sort of left the Israelites. He just said, you know what, just do whatever you want to do. And he allowed their enemies to teach them a lesson. He allowed their enemies to show them that, you know what, if you want to go ahead and just do your own thing, then you can, but there's always consequences. So God left the enemies to teach the Israelites warfare. And some battles are really designed to help you understand the importance or the threat of something. And God left them because he wanted them to understand the threats that they were exposing themselves to by their disobedience. We see that Ehud, who killed the king Eglon, he's left-handed, but interestingly enough, the tribe of Benjamin, which is the tribe where Ehud comes from, that whole tribe, the name Benjamin literally means the son of the right hand. So it's so interesting that Ehud was left-handed, but the whole tribe of Benjamin is named after being right-handed. So yeah, I just find that so interesting that the whole tribe of Benjamin is literally named after being right-handed, but the vast majority of the people who are in the tribe of Benjamin are left-handed. And I think, the revelation here is that God uses what is often unexpected or overlooked. So, God will still do his own thing, basically. God used what was very unexpected and overlooked. The fact that Ehud was a left-handed man and that it gave him an advantage in battle, especially against destroying the king Eglon. We see that one of the judges, Deborah, she was a female, she was a female judge. Quite interesting. And I think it's so interesting because the role of a judge, like I said, was not limited to just knowing the law and adjudicating cases, which is what Deborah did quite a lot. So she was a prophetess, and she also used to sit under the palm tree of Deborah, and she would, really help with just working out some of the issues that people had. But the Bible tells us that she really also led Israel into a battle. So she was working alongside a man by the name of Barak. And, God told Deborah, go and tell Barak that I want him to go and basically deliver my children out of oppression. And Barak refused to go without Deborah. So he said, okay, I don't mind going, but you must come first. You must come with me. And, Deborah says, okay, it's fine. I will come, but well, I'm a woman. So you must know that if I come and lead this battle with you, the honor and the victory of this battle will go to a woman. Very, very interesting. And we see that, the revelation here is that fear can cause someone to lose their moment of glory. So Barak was designed to lead the Israelites into battle. He was designed for being a deliverer. But we see that because he was too scared to go without Deborah, God said, fine, you can go. You will definitely get the victory, but the glory won't go to you. The glory will actually go to Deborah and also another woman named Jael, who was also quite central in the defeat of that story. Very, very interesting. So let's move over through to our next frame. All right, so in this frame, we see that now there is the rise of Gideon, one of my favorites, yet also like a little bit of a more complicated character. But he is one of my favorite judges, although he was not perfect. And I think towards the end, he kind of did lose his way. So maybe I should probably review if he's still my favorite, because towards the end, it kind of seemed like he was compromising a bit much. But yeah, so Gideon, this is a young man that God calls to be a deliverer of Israel. We see it's so sad because Midian was oppressing Israel whenever it is that they were planting crops and it was time for them, for the crops not to come into harvest. The Midianites would come and destroy all the crops. They would take all the crops and they would leave whatever little increase that Israel would have. The Midianites were always just staring like hyenas, just staring for an opportunity to steal from them and just oppress them. And that's because at this point, the worship of Baal was so hectic. So we see that Joshua, he felt weak. He didn't really rate himself, but an angel came up to Gideon and said, Gideon, you are a mighty man of valor. And Gideon said, me? Why me? And the angel says, well, God has chosen you, to basically lead Israel into glory, and into that God has basically chosen you to lead Israel out of oppression. And I think something that's so interesting, which kind of reminds me of me, is the fact that Gideon wanted so many confirmations from God. He was like, God, please confirm for me. Is it really you? Is it really you? It kind of got like a little bit much, like, okay, Gideon, come on, it's really God. Like, what do you mean? But I think God was kind of just like allowing him that grace. And I don't think it's something that God really promotes a lot. I think if God, instructs you to do something, it's okay to really confirm, but like consistent confirmation can also sort of mean that maybe you are doubting God. So yeah, I'm also quite guilty of that. Like, God, do you really want me to do that? Can you give me a sign? And most of the time God says, I'm not going to give you a sign, child. I just say do it. So yeah, so we see that God kind of plays along with Gideon with all of the signs that he wants from God, and that Gideon destroys the altar of Baal. Very, very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. God also reduces, this is one of my favorite stories. The power of God is so evident in the story of Gideon. They were about to go to war and they had 32,000 men. And God says, this is too many men to go into battle. I don't need 32,000 men. Just give me 300 men, And God wanted to show that it was his power that was actually granting Gideon the victory and granting the Israelites the victory. It wasn't because they had so many people. 32,000 was too much. There was no glory to God in 32,000 people going into battle. He said 300 men is fine. That's fine. And ultimately, Gideon defeats Midian through the help of God. So the often missed revelations here is the fact that God reduced the army of Israel so that Israel would not claim the credit. So God said, from 32, we're going all the way to 300, because if we don't do that, you're going to think it's because of your own strength why you won that battle. And then we also see that, Gideon later makes an ephod, which I don't know if it's ephod or ephod, but Gideon makes an ephod which Israel ends up worshiping. This is the reason why I say, towards the end, Gideon was kind of questionable. Like, child, why did you do that? Because now Israel begins worshiping this thing. And it's like, also, Israel, like, how many times do you want to be oppressed and set free and oppressed and set free? Like what is it, Yeah. And Israel worships this ephod. The revelation here is that the same man that was used by God can later become a source of idolatry. So in as much as he was used by God to bring freedom and glory and breakthrough for the Israelites, he was also the same door that opened up a door for idolatry. So yeah, interesting. Great victories do not guarantee lifelong faithfulness. And I think we'll also see that a lot with false prophets. Some false prophets actually start off well. They really just do have the right intentions, but somewhere along the line, they just sort of lose it, So great victories don't guarantee lifelong faithfulness. Not everyone who starts will necessarily finish the same. And unfortunately, we see that with Gideon, not only in the aspect of introducing a source of idolatry, the ephod, but that he also had so many wives. He had so many wives and a concubine. Yeah, so interestingly, his son Abimelech, he became a very evil ruler. So yeah, private compromise creates public consequences, and we really see that throughout Gideon. I think his heart was in the right place at first, but then eventually he just sort of lost the plot. Okay, and moving over through to the next frame, we see now that Abimelech, which is Gideon's son, he now comes into leadership, but his leadership is very much void of God. So there's no God in his leadership, and because there is no God in his leadership, probably because his father began to compromise along the way, now he's full-blown compromised. And, because of that, ultimately Israel falls into destruction. So the core theme here is that self-appointed leadership leads to chaos. And it's interesting because this is one of the instances where, there was self-appointed leadership. And we see that because someone self-appointed, that ultimately leads to a lot of destruction and chaos. The main event here is that Abimelech kills 70 of his brothers, 7-0. He becomes king. He rules very wickedly. And we see that his death was basically because there was a woman who dropped a millstone on his head. The book of Judges has a lot of story, narratives. I guess that kind of keeps it a bit interesting, and it's a bit easier to read through, unlike the Leviticus and the Numbers and Deuteronomy. And yeah, so some of the missed revelations in this frame is that Abimelech was never appointed by God. He made himself king. And the revelation here is that not all leadership is God ordained. And because this was the first time we see self-appointed leadership, it ultimately led to destruction, which also just speaks to us. Whenever it is that we self-appoint in anything, wherever it is that we do our own thing without being anointed or appointed by God, ultimately it will bring chaos. And because of this, a woman killed him. And back then, to be killed by a woman as a man of stature was a very shameful thing. So he died a very shameful death, which sort of represents and is a reflection of how wicked he was, and sort of a punishment or a consequence to his wickedness. He was killed by a woman. And he asks his armor bearer to kill him so that it won't be said that he was killed by a woman. So, in as much as, so he asked his armor bearer, after this woman has now basically blown a fatal blow to him, he's literally 5 to dying, but he still says to his armor bearer, please kill me, I don't want it to be said that a woman killed me. Scripture records it anyway, and because ultimately you can't rewrite God's record. In as much as he wanted it to be said, okay, no, his armor bearer killed him, ultimately it was a woman. The blow was fatal, okay? You were just trying to divert what was about to happen anyway. And we see that scripture still records the fact that he was killed by a woman, even though he asked the armor bearer to sort of finish it off. It shows us that you cannot rewrite God's record. Like, they still say, nah, we're not going to say that you were killed by your armor bearer. We're not going to do it. You were killed by a woman. Very interesting. Okay, next frame. There was temporary stability under Tola and Jair. So Tola and Jair are also judges in this whole list of judges. And we see that, there was temporary stability. So under these specific judges, there was some peace for a while, and there was just some mercy for a while. And it's interesting because there's very little recorded about these particular judges, yet it's one of the longest patches of peace in between judges that we actually see. So it's about Tola judged for about 23 years and Jair judged for about 22 years. So that's about 50 odd years of just peace and stability. So the revelation here is that even though there is little recorded about them, not all effective leaders are famous. And we kind of see that even with, colonialism or apartheid. There's many black figures who really fought the battle, but even though they were effective, not all of them actually made fame, So yeah, sometimes quiet leadership can still be very powerful. Sometimes quiet leadership can still be very impactful. All right, so let's move over through to our last frame. In our last frame, we see that Israel falls into the deepest idolatry yet. Okay, so despite all of these judges who would, arise and destroy the altars of Baal and other different gods, they would destroy their altars. Ultimately, at this point, now it's just full-blown worshiping other gods, and it's not just Baal. So Israel reaches new levels of spiritual corruption. They break the precedents. Like, they literally break the records. They break the records. They fully become invested. Like, these gods are their gods. And the different kinds of gods that they serve is Baal, Ashtoreth, the gods of Syria, the gods of Moab, the gods of Ammon, the gods of the Philistines. The Philistines, come on. I'm like, are you for real? Like, so many different gods. And God allows the Ammonites to oppress them. God says, you know what? It's fine. It's fine. Your gods, they will help you. He allows them to be oppressed because also what must God do at this point? Like, it can't be the same cycle literally spanning over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years from the time Moses was a leader all the way until these different, judges have erupted, and you're still not listening. God said, go and worship them. It's fine. And God allows the Ammonites to oppress them. And initially, God refuses to deliver them. God was like, it's fine. Y'all can just stay oppressed. It's actually fine. Like, y'all just remain there in that corner because you know what? You've just done too much. Like, you've just done too much. And then they repent. They repent very, very deeply. But initially, God was like, nah, I'm not going to deliver you. But the most revelations here is that this is the first time that God refuses to immediately deliver them. This is the first time when God immediately refuses to say, okay, I'm going to come and help you. It really required them to be deeply, deeply, deeply remorseful about what they did. And we see that God, said in Judges 10, I will deliver you no more. But then at some point, God could not endure how miserable they were. It hurt him how oppressed they were. Even though they still had this desire for wickedness, his mercy ultimately became greater than his anger. And he decided to forgive them and deliver them again. Literally, the story of the Israelites and God is just the story of redemption. Constantly falling, getting back up. Constantly falling, getting back up. And I think it should really show us, that God is not a God who's interested in punishing us. As believers, we are so hard on ourselves. Oh my gosh, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. But we see that while there's a whole generation that was very wicked, but God was still so patient with them. He still loved them so much. He still showed them so much mercy. Because even this time when God said, I'm not going to deliver you anymore, ultimately his wisdom said, I can't take how much pain they're in. I can't take how much they're hurting. I can't take how oppressed they are. I can't take, the shame on them, the pain, the oppression. I'm going to help them again. And that's the heart posture that God has for all of us. His mercy. The Bible tells us that he has brand new mercies for us every single day. Every single day, no matter what you did yesterday, his mercy for you today is new. So the more and more I read about the Israelites and God, it's actually a very sad story. It's a very, very sad love story, very, very lopsided love story. But I think it's good because it shows us how much room God has to forgive us. And family, with that being said, it's a wrap for today. It was very, very long, but I hope that you find some time just to watch it, even if you break it down into parts. And I'll see you again tomorrow.